Before we begin this incredible true story, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon so you never miss stories that touch the heart and inspire the soul. Lieutenant Sarah. Chen stood at attention in the briefing room of Naval Special Warfare Command. The fluorescent lights hummed above her head as 12 pairs of eyes studied her with barely concealed skepticism. She was the first woman assigned to this particular SEAL team for a joint operation, and the tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. Commander Jack Morrison sat at the head of the table, his weathered face showing no emotion as he flipped through her service record. Sarah had spent the last 8 years proving herself in the Navy. She had graduated top of her class in intelligence analysis, earned commendations for her work in counterterrorism, and volunteered for every difficult assignment that came her way. But standing in this room, facing these elite warriors, she felt like she was starting from zero again. The men around the table had been through hell together. They had trusted each other with their lives in the mountains of Afghanistan and the deserts of Iraq. To them, she was an outsider who had to earn every ounce of respect. Commander Morrison cleared his throat and began the briefing. The team was being deployed to a conflict zone in Eastern Europe where intelligence suggested a high-value target was hiding. Sarah's expertise in the region's language and culture made her essential to the mission. But as Morrison outlined her role, she could see the doubt on the faces around her. One operator, a burly man with a thick beard named Rodriguez, actually snorted when Morrison mentioned she would be accompanying them into the field. After the briefing ended, the real test began. Rodriguez approached her with his arms crossed. He asked her bluntly if she had ever been under fire. Sarah met his gaze steadily and said yes. She had served 2 tours in Iraq as an intelligence officer attached to Marine units. Rodriguez raised an eyebrow and asked if she could keep up with them on a 20-mile ruck march. Sarah replied that she would be happy to demonstrate. The challenge was set for dawn the next morning. That night, Sarah lay in her bunk staring at the ceiling. She knew what tomorrow would bring. They would push her to her absolute limits, hoping she would break or quit. It was a test she had faced before in different forms throughout her military career. Being a woman in male-dominated specialties meant constantly proving you deserved to be there. She was tired of it, but she also understood it. These men needed to trust that she would not be a liability when bullets started flying. As she finally drifted off to sleep, her hand unconsciously moved to her back, tracing the outline of the tattoo hidden beneath her shirt. It was a reminder of a chapter in her life that very few people knew about. A chapter that had forged her in fire and made her who she was today. Tomorrow, they would test her physical endurance. But if they only knew what she had already survived, they would never question her strength again. The alarm went off at 4:30 in the morning. Sarah was already awake, her gear packed and ready by her bed. She dressed quickly in her physical training uniform and laced up her boots with practiced efficiency. By the time she reached the assembly point outside the barracks, half the team was already there, including Rodriguez, who grinned at her like a predator who had spotted easy prey. Commander Morrison arrived exactly at 5 o'clock. He explained the route in clipped military tones. 20 miles through the coastal hills with 40-pound packs. No set pace. But anyone who fell more than 100 meters behind the group would be considered failed. Sarah adjusted the straps on her rucksack and took her place in the formation. She noticed she was positioned near the back, probably so they could watch her struggle. The march began at a brutal pace. The operators moved like machines, their legs eating up the terrain with mechanical efficiency. Sarah focused on her breathing and let her mind drift away from the burning in her legs. She had learned this technique years ago when physical pain threatened to overwhelm her. The trick was to separate your consciousness from your body, to observe the discomfort without letting it control you. Mile after mile passed beneath her boots. By mile 10, 2 of the younger SEALs had started to fade. Sarah could hear their labored breathing behind her. She pushed forward and actually moved up in the formation, passing 3 operators who had settled into a slower rhythm. Rodriguez glanced back at her with surprise in his eyes. Commander Morrison, who was leading the march, showed no reaction at all. He simply maintained his relentless pace like a machine that would never tire. The sun climbed higher in the sky, turning the morning cool into midday heat. Sweat poured down Sarah's face, and soaked through her uniform. Her shoulders screamed from the weight of the pack, and blisters were forming on her heels. But she had felt worse pain before. Much worse. She thought about the tattoo on her back and what it represented. Compared to that experience, this was just temporary discomfort. This would end in a few miles. What she had survived before had no guaranteed end date. As they crested the final hill with just 2 miles remaining, Rodriguez suddenly appeared beside her. He was barely breathing hard despite the grueling pace. He asked her where she learned to ruck like that. Sarah kept her eyes forward and said she had good teachers. Rodriguez studied her profile for a moment, and something in his expression shifted. The mockery was gone, replaced by genuine curiosity. He asked if she had been with a combat unit before. Sarah simply nodded. Some stories were better left untold until people were ready to hear them. They covered the last 2 miles in silence, and Sarah crossed the finish line in the middle of the pack, ahead of 4 SEALs who had started with far more confidence than they finished with. The physical test had bought Sarah some credibility, but she knew it was not enough. Over the next 2 weeks, the team went through intensive preparation for the deployment. They ran training scenarios in the kill house, practiced medical procedures, and rehearsed the mission plan until every operator could execute it blindfolded. Sarah participated fully in every activity, earning nods of approval for her shooting accuracy and her ability to think clearly under pressure. But there were still barriers. The team had inside jokes and references to past missions that she was not part of. They had a shorthand way of communicating that came from years of working together. During breaks, they would cluster together and talk in low voices, and conversations would pause awkwardly when Sarah approached. She understood it was not personal malice. It was simply the natural caution of a tight-knit group confronted with an outsider. Trust in combat units was not given freely. It was earned drop by drop, mission by mission, until suddenly you realized you were no longer the new person but part of the family. Commander, Morrison called her into his office one afternoon. He gestured for her to sit, and then studied her for a long moment with his sharp blue eyes. He told her that her performance had been exemplary, and that the team was impressed with her capabilities. But he wanted to know if she truly understood what she was signing up for. This would not be an intelligence-gathering mission conducted from a safe distance. She would be going into an active conflict zone where firefights were a daily occurrence. People would be trying to kill her. Was she prepared for that reality? Sarah met his gaze without flinching. She told him that she had been in combat before and that she understood the risks. Morrison leaned back in his chair and asked her about her time in Iraq. Sarah gave him the official version, the one that appeared in her service record. She had been attached to Marine units as an intelligence analyst, had been present during several engagements, and had earned a commendation for her work under fire. Morrison listened carefully, and when she finished, he nodded slowly. But she could tell he sensed there was more to the story than she was sharing, as she stood to leave. Morrison made a casual comment about how some operators had noticed. She always changed in private and never used the common shower facilities. He said he respected her privacy. But if there was anything he needed to know about her ability to perform the mission, now was the time to tell him. Sarah paused with her hand on the door handle. She almost told him then. Almost showed him the tattoo and explained what it meant. But something held her back. She simply said that she had no physical limitations that would impact the mission. Morrison accepted her answer, but she could see the questions still lingering in his eyes. That night, Sarah stood in front of the mirror in her private quarters and turned to examine her back. The tattoo stretched from her left shoulder blade down to the small of her back. It was a detailed image that told a story in ink and shading. A story that she had lived through, but rarely spoke about. She traced the lines with her fingers and wondered if she would ever stop carrying the weight of those memories. Tomorrow, they would board the transport plane for the deployment. Soon enough, Commander Morrison and his team would learn the truth about who she really was and what she had survived, whether she wanted them to or not. War had a way of revealing everything hidden beneath the surface. The flight to the forward operating base took 14 hours. Sarah sat strapped into the webbing seats of the military transport, surrounded by the SEAL team and their mountains of gear. The interior of the plane was loud with engine noise, making conversation difficult. Most of the operators slept or stared into the distance, lost in their own pre-deployment thoughts. Sarah watched them and wondered what they were thinking about. Families back home? Past missions? The uncertainty of what waited for them on the ground? They landed at dawn on a rough airstrip carved into the countryside. The base was a collection of temporary structures surrounded by concrete barriers and sandbags. Dust covered everything, and the air smelled of diesel fuel and burned garbage. Sarah followed the team to their assigned quarters, a long building with metal walls and a roof that rattled in the wind. This would be home for the next several months. Commander Morrison gathered everyone for a brief meeting, reminding them that they were in Indian country now and to stay alert at all times. Then he dismissed them to settle in and prepare their gear. The first week passed in a blur of patrols and reconnaissance missions. The team moved through hostile territory with practiced efficiency, gathering intelligence and building a picture of enemy movements. Sarah proved her worth by communicating with local informants in their own language and picking up on cultural nuances that the Americans would have missed. Rodriguez actually complimented her after she negotiated with a village elder to gain access to a crucial crossing point. He said she had a natural gift for reading people. Sarah accepted the praise with a quiet smile, thinking about how that gift had been developed through experiences none of them knew about. On their 8th day in country, everything changed. The team was returning from a night patrol when they heard the distinctive crack of gunfire in the distance. Morrison immediately ordered them to investigate. They moved quickly through the darkness toward the sound of battle. As they got closer, they could hear heavy automatic weapons fire and the occasional crump of grenades or mortar. Morrison established radio contact with the base and learned that a convoy from a different unit had been ambushed. The convoy was pinned down and taking casualties. They were the closest friendly forces available. The team went into action without hesitation. Morrison split them into 2 elements for a flanking maneuver. Sarah found herself assigned to Rodriguez's fire team, moving through a ravine to get behind the enemy position. Her heart pounded in her chest, but her hands were steady on her weapon. This was not her first firefight, despite what the team might have assumed. As they approached the enemy position, Rodriguez hand signaled for them to halt. Through the darkness, they could see muzzle flashes as insurgents poured fire down onto the trapped convoy. Morrison's voice crackled over the radio, counting down to the assault. When the signal came, the SEALs opened fire with devastating precision. The insurgents, who had been so focused on the convoy below, suddenly found themselves under attack from 2 directions. The firefight was intense, but brief. Within minutes, the enemy broke and scattered into the night. Sarah had engaged multiple targets, her training taking over as she moved and shot with mechanical efficiency. As the guns fell silent, she realized she was breathing hard but unhurt. Rodriguez appeared at her shoulder and said she had done good work. Then the team moved down to check on the convoy and render aid to the wounded. The aftermath of the firefight was chaos. Several soldiers from the convoy were badly injured. The team's medic worked frantically to stabilize them while waiting for the evacuation helicopter. Sarah helped where she could, applying pressure to wounds and offering words of comfort to men who were going into shock. One young soldier, who could not have been more than 20, grabbed her hand with desperate strength and asked if he was going to die. Sarah looked into his terrified eyes and lied with absolute conviction, telling him he was going to be fine and that help was almost there. She held his hand until the helicopter arrived and took him away into the night sky. Only then did she allow herself to feel the trembling in her own hands that always came after the adrenaline faded. After the ambush, something shifted in the way the team treated Sarah. She had been tested under fire and had not hesitated or frozen. Rodriguez started including her in the team's casual conversations, and even the quieter operators began to relax around her. Commander Morrison assigned her to increasingly important roles in their operations, trusting her judgment in critical moments. Sarah felt the invisible walls beginning to come down. She started to believe she might actually become part of this brotherhood. But there was still one barrier that remained. The team had started training without shirts in the brutal afternoon heat, and they had invited Sarah to join them. She always declined with vague excuses, changing for physical training in private and wearing long sleeves even when it was sweltering. She could see the curiosity in their eyes, the unasked questions about why she was so private about her body. Some probably assumed she was just modest or uncomfortable with the casual male culture. Others might have wondered if she had scars she was ashamed of. None of them could have guessed the real reason. 3 weeks into the deployment, they received intelligence about the high-value target they had been searching for. He was reportedly hiding in a compound in a town that had been heavily damaged by fighting. Morrison planned a night raid to capture or kill the target. The operation would be the most dangerous they had attempted so far, requiring them to move through hostile territory and assault a fortified position. During the mission briefing, Morrison emphasized that every operator needed to be at their absolute best. There was no room for hesitation or doubt. The raid was scheduled for the following night. Sarah spent the day checking and rechecking her equipment, going through her pre-mission rituals that had kept her alive this long. As evening approached, the temperature soared past 100 degrees. The team gathered in the shade of their building to do a final rehearsal of the assault plan. Everyone was stripped down to t-shirts or bare skin, trying to stay cool in the oppressive heat. Sarah stood apart in her long-sleeved shirt, sweat pouring down her face. Rodriguez called over to her and asked why she didn't take off the shirt. Before she could answer, a mortar round screamed in from the distance and exploded near the base perimeter. The alarm sounded, and everyone scrambled for their gear in defensive positions. Sarah ran with the team toward the barriers, her weapon up and ready. More mortar rounds fell, walking across the base in a pattern that suggested experienced gunners. Then small arms fire erupted from the tree line beyond the wire. The base was under attack. Morrison shouted orders, directing his team to reinforce positions. Sarah found herself shoulder to shoulder with the SEALs, returning fire at the muzzle flashes in the distance. The attack lasted nearly an hour before the enemy broke contact and withdrew, leaving behind a base that was battered but still functional. As the all-clear sounded and the team began to stand down, Sarah suddenly felt a burning sensation in her shoulder. She reached back, and her hand came away wet with blood. During the chaos of the firefight, shrapnel from a mortar had torn through her shirt and gashed her back. The wound was not serious, but it was bleeding steadily and would need treatment. Rodriguez saw the blood and immediately called for the medic. Sarah tried to wave him off, saying it was just a scratch, but Morrison ordered her to get it checked out. She had no choice but to follow the medic to the medical station, knowing that what she had kept hidden for so long was about to be revealed. The medic's name was Phillips, a quiet professional who had patched up more combat wounds than he cared to remember. He directed Sarah to sit on the examination table and turn her back to him. She hesitated for just a moment, then pulled off her torn and bloody shirt. She heard Phillips' intake of breath, but he said nothing as he began to clean the wound. The shrapnel had cut a diagonal line across her upper back, right through the middle of the tattoo that she had kept covered for so long. The tattoo was a complex scene rendered in black and gray ink. It showed a young woman in military fatigues, kneeling in the desert sand with her hands bound behind her back. Standing around her were shadowy figures with weapons. Above the scene, rendered in Arabic script, were the dates of her captivity. The tattoo was not decorative. It was a memorial, a reminder that she had survived something that should have broken her, and a promise to herself that she would never be that helpless again. Phillips worked in silence, applying antiseptic and bandaging the wound with professional efficiency. When he finished, he quietly told her that she should rest for a day before the mission. Sarah started to argue, but Phillips cut her off gently. He said the wound was not serious enough to keep her off the operation, but Morrison needed to clear her medically. She would have to show him the injury. Sarah closed her eyes and nodded. She had known this moment would come eventually. She just wished it had not been now, the night before the most important mission of the deployment. Commander Morrison arrived at the medical station 20 minutes later. Philip stepped outside to give them privacy. Morrison looked at Sarah with concern and asked to see the wound. She turned her back to him without a word. She heard him move closer, heard the sharp intake of breath as he saw not just the fresh bandage but the tattoo that told a story he had not known she carried. When she turned back around, Morrison was staring at her with an expression she could not quite read. Shock, certainly, but also recognition and something that might have been respect. Morrison spoke quietly, asking her if the dates on her back were from her time in Iraq. Sarah nodded. She had been embedded with a Marine intelligence unit when her convoy was hit by a coordinated attack. She was captured along with 2 Marines. They were held for 17 days by an insurgent cell that specialized in propaganda videos. The Marines were executed on camera after 5 days. Sarah was kept alive longer because they had plans for her. She did not go into detail about what happened during those 12 days she spent alone in captivity. Morrison did not ask. Some things did not need to be said aloud. Sarah told him that she was eventually rescued when a Delta Force team raided the compound based on intelligence from local informants. By the time they reached her, she had been beaten, starved, and subjected to interrogations that left scars on her mind that would never fully heal. After her recovery, the military had offered her a medical discharge with full honors. Instead, she had chosen to stay in. She had refused to let them break her permanently. The tattoo was her way of reclaiming the experience, of transforming it from something that was done to her into something she chose to carry. Morrison listened to all of this without interrupting, and when she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he asked her if she was ready for tomorrow's mission. Sarah met his eyes and said she had never been more ready for anything in her life. Morrison nodded slowly and told her she was cleared for the operation. As he turned to leave, he paused at the door. Without looking back, he said that what she had survived made her one of the strongest people he had ever met, and that he was honored to serve with her. Then he was gone, leaving Sarah alone with her thoughts and the ghosts that she carried on her back. The next day, the team conducted the raid with Sarah in a critical role. They captured the high-value target without friendly casualties. A textbook operation that would be studied later as an example of perfect execution. And when they returned to base, Rodriguez approached Sarah and asked if she would join them for a drink. Not as the outsider they had to tolerate, but as one of their own. Sarah accepted, and for the first time in years, she felt like she had finally found a place where she truly belonged. The tattoo on her back would always be there, a permanent reminder of what she had survived. Visible proof that she had earned her place among warriors through trials by fire that few could imagine, let alone endure. She had demanded nothing. She had simply shown them who she was. And that, in the end, was all the proof anyone should ever need.